Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lah. Wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Amma ba'd. فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قد أفلح المؤمنون الذين هم في صلاتهم خاشعون. Imagine this scene. A young man, fresh with excitement, has just achieved a significant milestone in his life. He's attained his driver's permit. Overwhelmed with joy and a sense of newfound freedom, he decides to celebrate by sneaking out late at night to meet with his friends. So as the house falls quiet and his parents drift off to sleep, he carefully takes his father's car keys, eager to experience the newfound freedom he's always dreamed of. So driving alone on the empty road under the cover of darkness, he feels exhilarated by the open road ahead of him. And throwing caution to the wind, he presses down on the accelerator, watching as the speedometer climbs 30 miles per hour, 40, 50, 60 miles per hour, until he's barreling through a residential area at nearly 100 miles per hour. Carelessly, he races through red lights and stop signs, reassuring himself that since no one is around, there's no possibility that he'll ever get caught. But just as that thought crosses through his mind, flashing red and blue lights illuminate his rearview mirror. His heart drops to his stomach as fear begins to take hold. 1,000 thoughts race through his mind. What will his father say? How disappointed will his mother be in him? He knows this moment could mean not just the loss of his driving privileges or his father's car, but the trust his parents have placed in him. Shaking with nerves, he pulls over to the side of the road, watching as the officer approaches. When asked for his license and registration, he fumbles in panic to provide them. And then comes the inevitable question. Sir, do you know how fast you are going? Overwhelmed by shame and a sense of guilt, the young man lowers his gaze, looking down directly at his feet, speaking softly as he admits his wrongdoing. Humbled, his pride is shattered. He finds himself pleading for leniency, fully aware that he's at the mercy of the officer. My brothers, this is the state of khushu. It is a condition of complete humility and reverence, where one's ego is subdued, and all that remains is sincerity, regret, and a heartfelt plea for forgiveness. And just as that young man, humbled and vulnerable in the presence of authority, so too should we approach our prayers with humility, with a state known as khushu. This humility is not simply a feeling, but a profound and active state of focus, concentration, and total submission to the ultimate authority, Allah the Almighty. Khushu is a deeply spiritual posture where we acknowledge our absolute dependence on Allah the Almighty. The Holy Quran beautifully highlights the importance of this humility, describing successful believers as those who humble themselves in their prayers in Surah Al-Mu'minun, chapter 23, verses 2 to 3 of the Holy Quran. It is these verses recited in the beginning which serve as a reminder that khushu is central for our spiritual success, anchoring our hearts and minds in devotion to Allah the Almighty. But let's now take a moment to reflect deeply on the concept of khushu, which again is a vital element of humility in prayer and the cornerstone of a believer's relationship with Allah the Almighty. The term khushu comes from the Arabic root khasha'a, which means to be lowly, humble, or submissive. As Hazrat Muslim Maud radiallahu anhu has explained, it evokes the imagery of the sun lowering itself at sunset, symbolizing quiet submission. And in the context of prayer, khushu is a state where both body and heart are fully immersed in humility, reverence, and focus, acknowledging the greatness of Allah the Almighty and again our dependence on Him. Khushu is described in the Holy Quran as a defining trait for true believers. Again, successful indeed are the believers, those who humble themselves in their prayers. This verse serves as a reminder that khushu is not just an ideal to strive for, but a prerequisite for spiritual success. It is the first milestone in the journey of faith, as Hazrat Muslim Maud radiallahu anhu has mentioned, a stage where the soul turns to Allah with complete humility, awe, and penitence, recognizing His majesty and our dependence on Him. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Awwal radiallahu anhu has also elaborated that khushu requires a deep sense of helplessness, an acknowledgement that we have no power or means without Allah the Almighty. This humility reflects not only in the heart, but also in our physical actions in prayer. True khushu is marked by steadfast focus, avoiding aimless movements or distractions, keeping one's eyes fixed on the place of prostration, and stilling the limbs to avoid vain or restless behavior. It's about creating an atmosphere of stillness and reverence, where every fiber of our being submits to Allah the Almighty. Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Rabi rahmatullahi alayh has also highlighted the connection between khushu and staying away from vain pursuits as mentioned in the subsequent verses. Those who immerse themselves in idle or meaningless activities cannot develop the humility required for true prayer. Khushu, he explained, is not just an isolated act of prayer, but part of a holistic lifestyle where the heart is freed from all distractions, allowing space for genuine devotion and focus. And Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, Ayatollah Ta'ala bin Nasir Aziz, has emphasized the broader meaning of khushu, describing it as adopting the utmost level of humility in every sense, lowering oneself, silencing the ego, and softening of one's voice. It's about seeing oneself as insignificant before Allah's greatness, keeping the eyes lowered in submission, and speaking with a voice of reverence. And it's until these qualities are fully realized, one cannot truly embody the rank of a believer in its complete sense. So khushu, my brothers, is not just a physical or emotional state. It's a profound acknowledgement of Allah's majesty and a personal realization of our own limitations. It transforms our prayer from a routine act into a heartfelt conversation with our Creator. And so when we strive for khushu, then we create a direct connection with Allah the Almighty that purifies the heart, elevates the soul, and ultimately leads to success in this life and the next. It is the journey of humility that transcends age, experience, and circumstance, uniting us all in our shared need for Allah's mercy and guidance. So definitionally, we have understood what khushu is. But what does khushu truly look like? And what elements must we keep in mind to ensure that our salat is imbued with sincerity, humility, and devotion? To answer this, we must look to the life of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who demonstrated khushu in his prayers through patience, forbearance, and complete focus. See, the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would offer his night prayers for such extended periods of time that his feet would often swell. When one of his companions remarked, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, why do you do such a thing? For Allah has forgiven you and your faults of the past and those to follow. He sallallahu alayhi wa sallam humbly replied, shouldn't I be a thankful servant of Allah? This profound example teaches us that khushu begins with gratitude. The Prophet ﷺ's prayers were not motivated by any personal gain, but rather with an overwhelming sense of thankfulness to Allah the Almighty. This is the essence of khushu, turning to Allah with a heart full of reverence and gratitude. Hence, the Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he's reported to have said that a man returns after saying his prayer, while a 10th part of his prayer, or a 9th part, an 8th, a 7th, a 6th, a 5th, a 4th, a 3rd part, or half of it is recorded for him. And another narration, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said and warned, indeed a person may pray for 60 years, yet not a single salah of his will be accepted. Perhaps he had perfected the ruku, but not the sujood. Perhaps he had perfected the sujood, but not the ruku. These sayings, they teach us that khushu is not about the mere performance of physical actions of prayer, but about the quality of our devotion. Are we truly present in our prayers, or are we distracted? The answer to this determines whether or not our prayers are to be accepted. And hence, the great companion of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Hazrat Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, he emphasized this point beautifully when he said that 2 rakahs with contemplation are better than standing up for the entire night with an inattentive heart, highlighting the importance of quality over quantity. That a single prayer offered with complete focus, patience, and humility outweighs countless prayers performed without reflection or sincerity. And since reflecting on these examples and the level of patience shown by the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, Ayyadu Ta'ala ibn Aziz, has beautifully summarized the essence of khushu and its relationship with patience. Hazur Ayyadu Ta'ala ibn Aziz states that we should pray to God with utter humility, that, O God, in your mercy and grace, come to our help and teach us the ways in which please you. Teach us those ways of worship and patience which please you. If you're seeking God's help for these blessings, then show humility and heighten your levels of patience. Patience, he explains, is essential to attaining khushu. It means enduring difficulties with dignity, remaining content with Allah's will, and steadfastly relying on Him. Khushu is not merely about lowering our gaze or softening our voice. It's about erasing arrogance, subduing our ego, and cultivating a sincere connection with Allah the Almighty. Hazur Ayyadu Ta'ala ibn Aziz, he further states that God does not care for the salat of a person who lacks humility and sincerity. True salat belongs to the one who turns to Allah with a humble heart and a resilient spirit. So hence the benefits of khushu, they cannot be overstated, as again it's the foundation upon which true spiritual success is built. Khushu is not merely a recommendation. It is the very first and most critical condition Allah the Almighty has set for believers to achieve His blessings. Hazur Anwar Ayatollah bin Aziz has beautifully explained that Allah promises success to those who humble themselves in prayer. And this success, or falah in the Arabic language, is profound in its nature. See, the word falah doesn't just mean success in the limited worldly sense. It encompasses ease, abundance, the fulfillment of desires, security, the enduring of goodness, happiness, and the granting of divine bounties both in this life and the hereafter. And these are blessings that are far beyond human comprehension, as they are reserved for those who worship Allah with true humility and sincerity, developing humility and khushu in their prayers. However, it is important to recognize that humility alone is not sufficient if it is not rooted in sincerity and devotion to Allah. As Hazur Edo Talab bin Aziz pointed out, even worldly people may display moments of humility or emotional vulnerability. For instance, they might cry or lament over minor matters, sometimes so dramatically that it leaves others in awe. In situations where their personal benefit is at stake, they may even endure humiliation to achieve their goals. These displays, however, are often shallow, driven by self-interest or an attempt to gain sympathy or admiration of others, stating that such moments of temporary humility, no matter how intense, lack the depth and sincerity required to attain Allah's pleasure. They are fleeting and tied to worldly pleasures. On the other hand, khushu, as defined in Islam, is a deeply spiritual state. It is not performed for personal gain, to impress others, or as a response to temporary emotions. It is a conscious and consistent effort to humble oneself before Allah, driven solely by the desire to earn His pleasure and mercy alone. See, those who seek Allah's pleasure, they avoid superficial displays of emotion or humility. Their khushu is not a passing state, but a constant companion in their prayers and daily lives. And the importance of khushu lies not only in achieving humility in prayer, but also ensuring that this humility stems from a pure and sincere intention to seek Allah's pleasure alone. See, worship and humility, they lose their meaning when they're performed for worldly gains or recognition. Hazrat Muslim radiallahu anhu, he once shared a very powerful story, one often related by Hazrat Khalifatul Masih al-Awwal radiallahu anhu, that illustrates this point beautifully. He mentions that there once was an elderly man who regularly offered his prayers in the mosque for many years. However, his intention was not to earn Allah's pleasure, but to gain the praise and admiration of others. Despite his years of effort, Allah the Almighty had placed it in the hearts of the community that this man was a hypocrite. And instead of praising him, they criticized him, calling him insincere, calling him a hypocrite. One day, this realization struck the man deeply. He reflected on how much of his life had been wasted chasing the approval of others instead of seeking the pleasure of Allah the Almighty. He thought, if I had worshipped Allah sincerely, He would have been pleased with me. This thought overwhelmed him, and he retreated to a jungle where he cried, repented, and resolved to change. He promised Allah the Almighty that from now on, I will only worship for your sake and to attain your pleasure. When he returned to his village, after this sincere transformation, an extraordinary change occurred. Allah the Almighty had placed it in the hearts of the community that this man was truly pious. The same community that once criticized him began to admire and praise him. Strikingly, now that he no longer sought their approval, they gave him the recognition that he once craved so much. The man thanked Allah the Almighty, saying, I prayed sincerely for just one day to attain your pleasure. And not only did you accept my worship, but you also granted me the very thing I once desired, but no longer care for. The story, it teaches us a profound lesson about the essence of khushu. Is that when we purify our intentions and approach Allah the Almighty with humility, free of ulterior motives, He not only accepts our worship, but also bestows blessings beyond our imagination. However, these blessings come as a natural consequence to sincerity, not as the goal. Hence, this is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has said that a man who wept out of the fear of Allah shall not enter the fire until the milk returns to the udder, which is a complete impossibility. Therefore, true khushu is achieved when the heart is solely focused on Allah, not distracted by the desire of worldly praise or recognition. As Hazur Edo Talab Nas Aziz emphasized, those who seek Allah's pleasure and worship with humility are the ones who attain true success, falah, a success that is eternal, encompassing the peace, blessings, and divine favor that only Allah the Almighty can bestow. And yet, the depth of khushu goes beyond just these practical demonstrations and their spiritual benefits. To truly understand its essence, we must delve into the deeper philosophy of khushu, as masterfully expounded on by the promised Messiah alayhi salatu. His insights illuminate the spiritual layers of this quality, explaining how khushu is not only a condition of prayer, but a transformative force which shapes a believer's entire relationship with Allah the Almighty. The promised Messiah ﷺ provides a profound exposition on the 6 stages of spiritual development and their correlation to the 6 stages of physical development, as outlined in Surah Al-Mu'minun, chapter 23 of the Holy Quran. He explains how each spiritual stage mirrors its corresponding physical stage, revealing the intricate relationship between the two. The first stage of development spiritually, khushu, or humility and meekness in worship, parallels the first stage of physical development, represented by the sperm cell. In elaborating on this connection, the promised Messiah ﷺ references the verses of Surah Al-Mu'minun and explains that obviously the sperm is a seed which embodies within itself all the faculties, characteristics, inner and outer organs. The physical features that are plainly revealed in the 5th stage are fully and manifestly perfected at the 6th stage. Nonetheless, the stage of the sperm is the most precarious of all stages, for it is like a seed that has not yet attached itself in any way to the earth. And in expanding on this, the promised Messiah ﷺ describes the qualities inherent with khushu and its similarity to that of the sperm cell, stating that the same are the characteristics that attend the first stage of a believer's spiritual development, the state of humility, meekness, tenderness, and pathos, that he experiences in worship and in the remembrance of God, which, in other words, means to cultivate in oneself anguish, tenderness, humility, modesty, the meekness of spirit, and a yearning and longing, and to turn to God having been overcome by his fear, as has been described in the verses, meaning that those believers have attained their desires who adopt humility and meekness in their prayers and in every type of remembrance of Allah, and who occupy themselves in remembering him with true fervor and supplication, passion, and anguish. This reflects on how khushu, like the sperm cell, is a seed of spiritual growth. It contains within it the potential for all the qualities of a true believer, but yet remains in a fragile state, vulnerable to being lost unless it is nurtured and connected with the source of all mercy, Allah the Almighty. Hence, the promised Messiah ﷺ, he further illustrates this link by explaining the difference between Allah the Almighty's attributes of rahmaniyat, or graciousness, and rahimiyat, of mercifulness, stating that it should be noted that when the favor of God Almighty is received without any effort on one's part, this is due to the attribute of rahmaniyat, or graciousness. For instance, everything that God has created for mankind by way of heaven and earth, etc., or even the creation of man himself, all this has come on account on God's rahmaniyat. But when one receives a favor as a result of one's deeds, worship, effort, and striving, it is the result of rahimiyat, or mercifulness. This has been the continuous divine practice towards mankind, so that when man adopts humility in his prayer and remembrance of God, that he makes himself deserving of rahimiyat. This distinction, it highlights that while Allah's graciousness is freely bestowed, his mercy is earned through sincere worship and devotion, beginning with khushu. and it's without genuine humility and dedication that khushu becomes like an impotent sperm, incapable of achieving its purpose. And while summarizing this analogy of the Holy Quran, the promised Messiah ﷺ warns against the pitfalls that can render khushu ineffective: arrogance, vanity, and insincerity. He states that, in short, all the excellence of the first stage of spirituality, the state of humility, depends on establishing a true link with the merciful God, in the same way as all the excellence of humility, in the same way as all the excellence of the sperm depends on it developing an association with the rahim, or the womb. Thus, if the state of humility is not really linked with God, the Rahim, or the merciful, and no true relationship with Him can develop, then that state is akin to the impure sperm that can never develop a relationship with the rahim, or the womb. This profound analogy reminds us that khushu must be rooted in sincere desire to please Allah. Without this sincerity, humility becomes hollow, unable to bear the fruits of spiritual progress. It is this connection with Allah the Almighty, established through patience, forbearance, and deep humility, that transforms khushu from a fragile seed into the foundation of a complete spiritual being. If, however, we truly desire to develop khushu in our prayers, it cannot be a fleeting or occasional state. The promised Messiah ﷺ has emphasized that khushu must become a permanent part of our worship, sustained through consistency and diligence. This is why the Holy Quran concludes the stages of spiritual development with the verse, وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَلَىٰ صَلَوَاتِهِمْ يُحَافِظُونَ, and who are strict in the observance of their prayers. This final stage represents the culmination of spiritual maturity, where prayer is not merely a ritual, but the very essence of one's existence. And the promised Messiah ﷺ has explained this beautifully. He writes that it is evident that man strives arduously and consistently, fully and all the time, to safeguard and protect only such a thing in whose loss he envisages his own ruin and destruction. For example, a wayfarer traveling through a barren wilderness, wherein there is no hope of finding water or food for hundreds of miles, will guard his belongings of food and water as dearly as his own life, for he knows losing them would mean death for him. Thus, the people who safeguard their prayers with the same care and do not abandon them, even if it means the loss of possessions or honor, or even incurring someone's ire, and are anxious lest they miss their prayers, so they all but die for the sake of prayer and cannot for a moment bear to be oblivious to the remembrance of God. Such are the people who in fact consider worship and remembrance of God to be the essential nourishment on which their life depends. See, the key to achieving such spiritual discipline lies in consistently offering all 5 daily prayers with sincerity and devotion. These prayers serve as a foundation for nurturing khushu and for maintaining our connection with Allah the Almighty. And it's by safeguarding each of these prayers with urgency and care that we transform khushu from an occasional feeling into an enduring state of humility, leading us towards Allah's mercy, bounties, and nearness. So as we come to a close, I wish to reflect once more on that story of the young man from the beginning, who, standing before the officer, found himself at the mercy of a judgment that could not be avoided. For the officer, bound by law and duty, had no choice but to administer a reprimand for the wrong that had been committed. And similarly, his parents, despite their boundless love, were also constrained by their responsibility to guide and discipline him. And yet, in all of this, we are reminded of a stark contrast. The mercy of Allah, which transcends all bounds, is infinite and is not confined by any worldly limitations. For it is Allah the Almighty who declares in the Holy Quran, Rahmati wasiyat kulla shay'in, that my mercy encompasses all things, reminding us that while human mercy is finite and often restricted by circumstances, the mercy of Allah is vast and all-encompassing. He forgives and blesses beyond what we can even comprehend. However, to become deserving of this divine mercy, we must strive to develop true and sincere humility in our hearts, a khushu that permeates our prayers, our actions, and our very being. And to partake in this mercy, we must strive to worship Allah with sincerity and humility, cultivating khushu in our 5 daily prayers and beyond. As the promised Messiah ﷺ likened khushu to the first seed of spirituality, fragile, yet brimming with potential. And like a seed must root itself firmly in the soil, khushu must be nurtured through a genuine connection with Allah, free from arrogance or vanity. This humility transforms prayer into a profound act of devotion, as exemplified by the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who prayed with such gratitude and fervor that his feet would swell. And as Khalifatul Masih al-Khamis, Eid Talab Nasr Aziz reminds us, that patience is a key to achieving khushu. It demands endurance, steadfastness, and a complete reliance on Allah. And it's when we approach Him with this sincerity that He draws us near, showering us with His mercy and guiding us towards success in both this life and the hereafter. Indeed, just as the Holy Quran promises. But for this, we must adopt the highest exemplary form of humility. And as the promised Messiah ﷺ beautifully wrote, "Battar bano har ek se apne khayal mein, shayad isi se dakhal ho, darul wisal mein." That think of yourself as inferior to everyone else. Perchance thereby you may enter the place of union. May Allah the Almighty enable us to adopt this humility, to purify our hearts and to transform our prayers into a source of spiritual strength. May He accept our worship, shower us with His boundless mercy, and grant us the eternal rewards of His pleasure. Ameen. Wa akhir da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Narae Takbir.